Welcome to the Social Community Show, where our mission is to help you learn, grow, and transform on your path to becoming legendary. Today, we're discussing the mechanics of the human spirit. For over 40 years, Bob Violino analyzed the calculated world of business and technology trends. He then made a profound pivot. He turned his analytical mind toward the most complex system we possess, human resilience. Bob is author of Life Lessons, his newest book, and New Life, exploring how transplant recipients and everyday people can find extraordinary courage in the face of seemingly unsurmountable obstacles. If our mission is to learn, grow, and transform so you can become legendary, Bob is the exact guide we need today. He shows us that gratitude is not a positive feeling, it's a deliberate daily discipline. We're going to explore how to build mental toughness, navigate severe adversity, and shift your mindset to spot the wonders where others see only chaos. Get ready to take notes. Without further ado, let's talk with Bob. Bob, welcome to the Social Chameleon Show.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here.
So you have quite an interesting background. And it seems like from the things I looked into you about, you seem like a very lucky guy. You've had a lot kind of go on in your life personally and whatnot. How do you kind of stay in this positivity? How do you stay in this mind frame? There's so much going on. Like I said, it seems like luck is on your side.
Well, it's not always easy. Positivity is something I've written about quite a bit in my blog and in the new book. Mm-hmm. But I tell this to people all the time. It's not easy to maintain positivity. We live in a negative world for the most part. The news that we watch on, what we read can lean towards the negative, and we tend to emphasize negative. I think that's sort of like human nature.
Right.
So I will say that it's not an easy thing to do, but it really has depended on each episode that I've experienced in my life. Like I had kidney disease fairly early on. It started when I was in my 20s and had to go on dialysis, and that took a lot of effort to maintain positivity during that time period. I had a young family, and it was difficult to work full time, and so I had to constantly tell myself, well, look at the positives, and luck is certainly I've been fortunate. I had even before that I had a car accident that I remember when I was my car was hit twice, and I did not have my seatbelt on, and I went flying through the passenger door.
Oh no!
I was unconscious. My head hit the concrete in the street, and I remember the ER doctor telling me when I came to, you're really lucky you survived this, and in most cases that wouldn't have happened. So, and then with the kidney disease, I ended up getting a transplant from my wife in 1995. We happened to be a really good match. That happens a lot with siblings, parents, children, because you're genetically related. Mm-hmm. Spouses, not so much. So I was very fortunate that we were a good match, and here we are, 30 years later. I just celebrated the 30th anniversary, and
congratulations!
Thank you, in October. So I would consider that very lucky. And I had a cardiac arrest in 2022, in which I was clinically dead for almost 10 minutes, and not only survived that, but came out of it without cognitive damage, which is fairly rare, I think, for something like that. So, I mean, there could have been brain damage, there could have been all kinds of things, but I came out of that. And not to bore you with medical stuff, but the last thing I want to mention is I had a vascular condition, and my left foot was basically, the circulation got cut off. There were no vessels that were working. So I had to have my foot amputated. And after the surgery, I was doing fine for a few days, and all of a sudden things started tanking. I went into respiratory failure. I went into heart failure. I was in the in the ICU for several weeks, and things were not looking good. I remember writing goodbye notes to my family.
Wow.
And it was really, really touch and go there for a while. And then I recovered. So in all these cases, I guess you could say I've been lucky. I would rather they have not occurred in the first place, but
Sure.
given that they did, I came out of it, and here we are. I'm here talking to you about it. So I think one thing that's been key to remaining positive is support from family, my wife Renee, my sons, other family members, and of course the medical staff, the healthcare professionals who helped, friends. I think it's very important to have a support group. It's, I think, really, really hard to get through stuff, difficult challenges if you're doing it or trying to do it by yourself. We all need others to help us through. And so that's a key part of the positivity thing. There have been times when I was in the hospital, and I remember I had one of these after the foot amputation. I was in for 5 weeks.
Wow.
And it really you have days, you have ups and downs, and when you're going through a difficult time, it can be really tough to be upbeat. And I remember nurses or physical therapists or other professionals who would be helping me out would come in and just cheer me up, and that was important. And and of course family members, like I said, very important.
With support, what does that look like? Are you talking to your family and saying, hey, this is what I need, this is what I would like? Because a lot of times when we all have tragedies, we probably don't experience enough, so we don't have a good, I guess, frame of reference or something. So everybody's like, oh, I feel so bad for you, oh, so sorry for that. But those things maybe don't seem to work. What are you saying something to people? How does that kind of look for you?
I think just people being there for you, even let's say in the hospital, going back to that, even if I have visitors come in and just hang out, they could be having lunch there or reading a book. Just their presence,
okay,
is comforting. And of course chatting, and distractions, watching something on TV, a movie or something like that, or doing working on puzzles together, crossword puzzles. I remember after the cardiac arrest, both my sons happened to be in the hospital visiting, and they would quiz me. We would work on the New York Times crossword puzzle, and which can be pretty challenging. And they would give me the clue, and I would try to come up with the answers. And that was probably very helpful in retrospect. And I look back on that and keeping me sharp, at a time when I probably needed that. You talk about the cognitive impact of something like that. So things like that. And I think support isn't necessarily what you said earlier. Oh, I feel so bad for you, and it's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people, I don't want to hear that. I'd rather hear
Right.
how you're doing, how's it going, what do you need, what can I get you, what can I do, or what in what ways can I? A lot of times they don't even have to ask. It just I'll say, would you mind getting me this or that, or whatever, or doing this. And I think just the being there, being present, and showing that they care. It can be a phone call from somebody, or even a text from somebody. I remember when I was in for one of my procedures, and my birthday was coming up, and I got overwhelmed with texts from people, a lot of whom I hadn't heard from in a while. And yeah, it might have been sort of a transient thing, but yeah, just getting that that sense of support, or hey, I'm thinking about you. It was important for me at that time, so I really appreciated that. So I think support can be manifested in any number of ways, but I think just even the simplest things, calling somebody who's hurting, going out to for a meal or something like that, or just stopping by to watch something on TV, or whatever, is important.
So I'm trying to. So even though if it's not necessarily, I say I'm the person that's seeing you, and I'm like, I don't know what I could do for you, but just kind of saying like, hey, you need something, let me know. That can be enough. Even
I
though I
think
don't have
sometimes
like
it
a
can.
plan, or like I don't know what I could do for you. I don't really know what you need done. Maybe I can mow your lawn or something. But if I don't really, because sometimes that feels like it's like, you know, when people say things to you, you're like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how you can help me. I don't know what you're doing. These just sound like maybe like platitudes or something. And it's like, you're not being helpful because you're not helping me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you mean from the perspective of the person who's visiting somebody who's in need, or
I guess either way, I'm trying to think of, I'm trying to think of me personally, like when I've had something and it's like, you hear those things like, oh, so sorry, anything you can do, let me know. And I'm like, I can't think of anything I could possibly, versus in other people, or even I'll try to do this if I can think of something. It's like, hey, I'm gonna bring by dinner on Tuesday. Don't cook nothing. I got a thing for you. I know things are tough. Like I'm trying to like balance between the two of those. Like, saying things that just maybe are like, oh, I'm gonna pray for you, and it's like, okay, but does that really mean anything? But it sounds like what you're saying is even just the thought of that is enough.
I think so. Although you're right, that does happen a lot where there's generalities, like somebody will say, let me know what I can do for you, keeping it very broad or whatever.
Right.
As opposed to what you said, which is I'm bringing dinner by Tuesday, don't cook. That's a specific, time and place, and that's great, because then you're stating something specifically that you want to do, or even mowing the lawn, like you said before. I can come by I'm going to come by on Saturday and do the lawn for you because I know you're not able to do it right now.
Right.
Or so I think when you can be specific like that, that's great. And it's not always easy because sometimes you can't think of specifics. But there's always something. Everybody needs help.
Right.
And I will say this from the perspective of somebody who's needed a lot of help or support over the years. You have to be kind of humble, willing to accept that. We all have pride. I have a lot of pride. We all have pride.
Sure.
We all want to be independent. I certainly do. And at times I've not been able to be independent. So you have to kind of learn to be humble, and accept people's help. And, in a lot of cases, you might be helping them. Somebody might really need to feel needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always a good idea, I think, to accept people's offers to be there for you, because you may be helping them in some ways more than they're helping you. Mm-hmm. Because I think we all have a need to be useful and helpful, especially when it comes to somebody we care about, and so it really kind of works both ways. You can be a win-win when people volunteer to help.
Okay, thank you for that. Because I haven't experienced a lot of tragedy in my life. Most of my family's still alive. So as I'm trying to think through what you're saying, and I'm like, like you're kind of saying with my grandma, she'll email me or call me and be like, oh yeah, I just spent 4 hours cutting the bush. I'm like, grandma, I could have came down to 20 minutes and I would have been done in 10. But she won't do it. And then I'm trying to think like, oh, how do I offer this to you and allow you to accept the help when she still wants to be independent, even though she's getting up in age, and she thinks she can still do these things, and she kind of can, but it's kind of like to my earlier point, it's like I don't know what to do to help. But it's like I don't just want to show up, or maybe I do need to just show up more, and maybe once every Saturday or something a month. I would stroll down to my grandma's house and be like, hey, what do you got going on around here?
Yeah, because it's tough when somebody is independent.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing, like, does she live by herself?
Yes, and she's lived by herself for quite a while, and she's been pretty independent majority of her life.
Exactly. So,
I don't know what he died 7, 8, 10 years ago, something like that. So, but even then, they were very independent people on their own. So she does have that independent spirit.
Yeah, and it can be difficult because that makes them happy. The independence makes them happy. So it's a fine line. You don't want to go over there on your own and start doing the gardening or whatever.
Right.
That might work again. That might backfire. So but I do think just visiting, just showing up, and hey, I'm gonna hang out and chat for a little while. Mm-hmm. It's a nice day. Let's sit in the backyard or wherever on the front porch and hang out. That's she can still maintain her independence,
right?
And you're visiting. You're being there for her in some way.
Oh, thank you. That's very clarifying for me. Like I said, I have a hard time when I know somebody's experiencing tragedy, like, what do I say to you? What do I like? But like you're saying, just saying, hey, I hope everything's great. Let me know. Seems like at the bare minimum, that's a good gesture.
I think so. Yeah.
Good. That's good to know. I think that can help some people out there listening as well. How do you, like you talked about kind of earlier, when things get dark, things get down, you're having setbacks or whatever. How do you keep the positivity? Is there like some type of discipline or some type of journaling methodology? Like what have you found that works? What do you like to think about?
I think when you're in a really dark place, when like where I've been, let's say after some of the surgeries I've had, or after the cardiac arrest, I remember feeling this, like, maybe it wasn't clinical depression, but it felt like that. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to kind of acknowledge it first. You have to sort of let yourself feel that way. I know psychologists like to say that, feel what you're feeling. Allow yourself to feel that pain or loneliness or whatever. And you can't just flip a switch and say, oh, it wasn't such a big deal. I'm okay. It takes time, and it can sometimes take a long time, but you got to allow yourself some time to heal. And then I think just do things you like. Mm-hmm. Do things you like. So, whatever that might be, hobbies, that you enjoy. As soon as you're physically able to do them, like you're hiking or mountain climbing, whatever you want to do, skiing, mm-hmm. And so give yourself time, and then do those things, positive things. Try to hang out with positive people, and you climb out of it. It can take a while. You seek professional help too if you need it. Mm-hmm. I can't emphasize that enough. If you feel like you're really down in the dumps and nothing's getting better, and it just seems like there's nowhere to turn, that's when I think you need to see a professional and talk it out. Mm-hmm. And I think I've known people who hesitate to do that, and it's kind of a pride thing. Oh, I don't need to see a shrink, or I don't need to see. I'm good. I'm strong. But we all need help now and then, I think, and so I would urge somebody who's really, really having issues to seek out professional help, even if it's just for one session, to try to get on the right path. And or you can speak to clergy, and talk things out with them. So there's a lot of resources. We just have to know where to find them and have the desire to seek them out. So, I'm trying to think, like, when you're in that depression state, or you're in that kind of the beginning stages, maybe you're not accepting it yet, or something like that. Is there maybe a journaling technique or some type of mantra or affirmation, or something like that, where you can start to kind of accept what's going on and then start to dig yourself out? Or maybe there's like a morning practice or something like that, where you constantly do this and you kind of keep your car tuned up a bit, mm-hmm. I use that metaphor. Yeah, I think journaling is a good idea. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very good idea. And I've done some of that. I have a gratitude journal book that I write in. I should use it more often than I do, but mm-hmm. It's helpful just to write down, hey, this is what's positive. These are the things I'm grateful for today. These are the things that I'm really thankful for. This is what I hope to accomplish today. This is my aspiration. This is what I'm hoping to. This is how I'm going to do something to help affect somebody in a positive way. I'm going to do something, to help somebody else. I think that's and by writing it down, it takes it a step farther than just thinking about it and having it be a fleeting thought. You mm-hmm. write it down in a journal or on a notepad, and it's has a little more meaning if you do that. So that's a good idea. And another thing I just thought of is making progress. If you're recovering from something, small, accomplishments. I remember when I had one of the surgeries, it was difficult to make the bed. I had to struggle. It hurt to bend over and pull the sheets up and all. But I did it, and I worked through it. And those first few days, I put down, checked off, one of my goals today was to make the bed. And I check it off as something accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't easy the first few weeks, but then it got easier and easier. But things like that, or and that's one of the things I talk about in the book is the importance of goal setting. We all, you can write down at the beginning of the year, this is what I hope to accomplish. But I think it can be even more effective if you have daily goals or even weekly, where you can write down what you hope to achieve and then try to achieve that. It's kind of like a to-do list, but sometimes it can be a bigger thing. Like when I was writing the book, I said, well, I want to try and write a chapter today, a full chapter, or this week. This week I want to get a chapter done. And by doing that, it kind of made myself think, not let myself off the hook with excuses. Oh, I don't really feel like doing it. I would get it done. So I think that's a good way to stay positive too, because you achieve something. You get something done in that time period. So that's helpful.
When I'm listening to talk about this, I'm thinking, let's say your goal for the week is, making it better, doing your book chapter. And then you're saying, okay, to do this by, let's say Sunday, this is Monday, by next Sunday, I want to have this done. Are you then taking that weekly goal and then breaking it into like micro goals? Like every day I need to sit down for an hour and just do some kind of writing, or, today I'm just going to get the blanket back up on the bed because that's going to be hard for me. And tomorrow I think I can maybe sort of put it on there. Is that how you're thinking about this?
Yeah, I think so. It is a good way to break it down, like something like the book chapter. That can be ambitious, doing it in a day for sure. But let's say it's a week, then yeah, you could break it down by, this is how many words I want to write today, and then I want to write 500 words in that chapter by the end of today, and tomorrow maybe 700, and whatever. And then so it's not like you're saying I've got to write 3,000 words today, because that can be, as a writer, I know that can be pretty overwhelming. But yeah, you can certainly break the goals down into segments to help them be more achievable. Because goals, let's face it, have to be achievable.
Right.
I'm not going to say, well, my goal this month of March is to climb Everest. I want to do that. I know it's not going to happen. So It's got to be a realistic goal. It can be hard, but not impossible. In my case, climbing Everest would be at this point pretty impossible.
Yeah. So when you're talking about this, I'm thinking, if I set myself this ambitious target for whatever the week of the month of the quarter, sometimes I'll be like, oh, where do I start? I don't even know where to begin. And then you get into that kind of mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there any other goal setting techniques that you've developed or you kind of teach or?
Yeah. If you get stuck, if I get stuck on something, like let's say writing, I keep coming back to that because that's what I do.
You're a writer. Right.
So let's say I'm working on an article for a client and I just can't come up with a good lead. I can't think of how to start the article. And this has happened to me a bunch of times. Instead of just being stuck there and not being able to progress, I say, well, all right, I'm going to start in the middle. I'm going to think of, something I want to say. I've got some quotes that are really good that I want to put in there. So I put the quotes into the article, and then I start with that section. Or it can even be the end of it. I think, oh, this is a great conclusion here, so I'm going to work on this first. And then once I start writing from other parts of the article, that all of a sudden a lead develops in my mind, and I've got the lead, and then I can put that in. So, something like that. I'm trying to think of another example that doesn't involve writing.
I like what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be linear, right? You can start wherever you need to start to get going.
Yeah, I think so. It could be with projects too. Let's say I've got a bunch of assignments on my list to do, and I look at them as well. I don't want to start with that one. I'm not looking forward to that. So I'm gonna go to one that's due maybe a little bit farther out than the first one in terms of deadlines. But I'm going to work on that because I feel ready to work on that one. So I start with that one, and then maybe the next day I feel like working on the first one that has a tighter deadline. So sometimes it's a matter of shifting things around on your to-do list. Some people have the philosophy of, well, start with the worst thing that you really don't want to do today. Get it out of the way. Get it done. And that could be another way of and then the rest is easy. The other things are easier to achieve. So that's another tactic you can use.
Yeah, sometimes another one I've kind of learned is looking at your kind of overall thing and saying, what is one thing I could do that could either remove these items or eliminate them altogether? Like by doing this A, C, D, G, and Y all just kind of get handled on their own by kind of starting with this one, like kind of looking at more of a holistic view of everything. Like, I bet kind of seems to help as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to go back to kind of the kidney transplant because it's kind of interesting. I think being your spouse and whatnot. Was there any maybe guilt or something like that was like, I don't know if I want to take this from my spouse, the mother of my children and stuff like that. Is there anything like that you had to kind of work through?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When she first volunteered to be a donor, because I had a previous transplant that the year before that failed, didn't work. Mm-hmm. And my siblings, some of my siblings volunteered to be donors, and they did the blood test, the tissue typing match, and for one reason or another, they couldn't be donors logistically or whatever. And when Renee said she wanted to volunteer to be tested, I said, thanks so much. I really appreciate it, but no, I can't let that happen. And I was pretty adamant about this because, for one thing, I was thinking, what if she goes through this? That's a big operation. Donating a kidney back then, they didn't have laparoscopic techniques like they do today, which is much easier on the donor. It was a difficult, major surgery. And I'm thinking, what if she does that, goes through with this, and it doesn't work? I'm going to feel absolutely horrible. And yes, I was extremely concerned about her welfare. So it took a lot of convincing. And we did do the blood test. And when she turned out to be a great match, well, all of a sudden it seemed like this might really be the way to go. But I still needed more than that, and I needed the doctors to reassure me that everything was going to be okay, or to assure me. And then when it came time to scheduling the actual surgery, they said, well, the best and closest date we have available is October 25th, which happens to be our wedding anniversary.
Nice.
So that kind of clinched it. At that point, I'm saying, wow, the stars are aligned. I can't fight.
Right.
So I agreed, but it doesn't mean I wasn't still concerned. And, I remember coming to after the operation in the recovery room, and the very first question I asked the nurse was, how's my wife? How does my wife come out of surgery? Because that meant everything. Not how's the kidney doing, but how is she doing? So it's not an easy thing. And over the years, there have been times when I felt like, this is a tremendous sacrifice. And I've said that, and she does not like to hear that. She doesn't look at it that way.
Right.
She did this because she wanted to do it. And it wasn't an obligatory thing or anything like that at all. So, and this is kind of how it should be between donors and recipients. I think us recipients have to realize that living donors, are doing this because they want to.
Right.
And there should be no feelings of guilt or gee, how do I repay this? You can't repay it. For one thing, you can't possibly. So don't even think of ways. I mean, I buy her flowers on her anniversary, things like that. But there's no way you can possibly repay something like that. So it was interesting. The whole experience. We got a lot of media coverage on TV and newspapers, and because back then spousal donations were still pretty rare. Mm-hmm. So
that's tough. I can't imagine such a thing. How how did you, I guess, work through that mentally? What was the self-talk like, kind of saying like, hey, this is a great gift. She loves me and she wants to do this. This is going to be great. Apparently it worked out well. You've had this kidney for 30 years now. So it was really a tremendous decision, especially you've already had one that was rejected. How did you work through that? What was the self-talk like?
I just thought through why she was doing this.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that from her perspective, she was trying to, we had our first son at that point, the younger son wasn't born yet.
Mm-hmm.
She said she wanted me to be around. He was 8 years old at the time, I think.
Okay.
And she didn't want him to lose his father. And she didn't want to lose me,
Mm-hmm.
her husband. So there was a lot of, I understood that. And I told myself that over and over again. This isn't some small favor. This isn't some small matter. It's a big deal. And the doctors were all telling me, you have to have this done. I was going downhill fast.
Mm-hmm.
I had been on dialysis and my health was declining, and this needed to be done. So it wasn't like I had let me think about it. Let's maybe think about it and come back, revisit in 6 months or maybe
Mm-hmm.
next year. It wasn't going to work that way. So there was kind of a time crunch, pressure there. And I had to be practical. I had to put emotions aside, in terms of, how is this going to work out, and think of, well, what's best for all of us here. And to my wife's credit, she never, ever has questioned her decision, and never had any doubts either about being a donor. So that was very helpful too.
That's amazing. So you also wrote a book, New Life, where you documented the experiences of transplant recipients. What's some of the lessons we can learn from them?
Yeah, that was my first book, 2003. And I think, resilience is a big lesson. And I talk about that in my latest book.
Right.
We all have built-in resilience. We all, it's part of our human experience, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of survival. So some people are maybe come by it more easily than others. And we can learn it too. We can learn to be resilient.
Right.
And I think that's a key part of all of this. We talked about earlier, like, how do you bounce back? How do you be positive after challenges? Well, you have to rely on resilience. You have to be able to keep fighting. And sometimes for long periods of time, because, it can take a while for the healing process to complete. So I think I learned that in interviewing all those people, and some of them had heart transplants, some of them had lung transplants,
Wow.
liver transplants, bigger deals. Kidney transplant is a big deal in its own right, but those could certainly be, if a heart transplant fails, you're in big trouble.
Right.
Same with lung transplant, and liver. Kidney, you can always go back on dialysis if you can. But so I think I learned almost all of these people had resilience built into them, and relied on it heavily. And I think there was a lot of faith. That was a running theme.
Mm-hmm.
They all had faith, no matter their religion or even no religion, if they just prayed a lot, and relied either on clergy or on religious practices. That was important. Their attitude was important. They all had, a lot of them had in common a positive attitude, a can-do spirit. I can get through this, and I think a lot of them also had a good sense of humor. They didn't take themselves too seriously, and also great support system. People around them who were there when they needed them. So those are some of the common traits of those people.
Seems like those are the same kind of traits you see in maybe biblical texts or ancient writings, where these things of kind of getting away from yourself a bit, and being of service and those types of things. Were the people that did well after the transplant, do you think they had a good sense of resilience before, or they developed it along the way?
Well, probably both, because
Okay.
they would have had to have some a sense of resilience prior to, because they would have been going through some sort of a condition, like a heart problem or a breathing problem or whatever. So they had to kind of learn, I think, to be resilient, even to get to the transplant point.
Okay.
And then once they were past that, they definitely had to rely on the resilience to recover, recuperate, deal with challenges like the drugs you have to take for the rest of your life to keep the organ from being rejected. It's not like, it's not an easy road afterwards. You have to continue to maintain that sense of resilience for the rest of your life, pretty much, and you can have ebbs and flows. Like some days you feel okay and some days you're not so great. And you have to push through those days when you're not feeling great. And that's, I think, where resilience comes into play.
From your experiences and or what you've learned from the recipients, was there something, maybe a common theme or something where people would help cultivate this resilience? Was there techniques or, I don't know, trainings or something that people were doing or you were doing?
I don't know if I say training. I think it takes practice. It takes practice. You have to try and you have to do a lot of changing your thinking. You have to keep pushing yourself back towards positive thinking, and you might slide back a little bit. You got to push yourself again into the positive thinking. So I think that's part of it. I think it really works differently for different people.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has different ways of handling challenges, and there isn't a better way necessarily. It's whatever works for the individual. So I think doing stuff you like. I remember one guy I knew who I wrote about had a heart transplant, and he played in a band. He was a guitar player, and he loved it. He just loved playing guitar. So as soon as he was able to, he got back into his band. They do shows, and he really enjoyed. Got a lot out of that. That helped him stay positive. He could look forward to that next concert, and whatever, and something like that. Or another woman who I wrote about who got a lung transplant. She liked to climb mountains. I mean, I was talking about Everest before. She was a serious mountain climber. And as soon as she was able to, there's a woman who had a lung transplant.
Wow.
And she went back to that kind of thing, hiking, really challenging hikes and stuff like that. So doing stuff you like, you enjoy.
I feel like this kind of comes back around to goal setting, right? You've got a future thing you're working towards, and then you got these micro goals. Like, I got to get ready for my transplant. I got to get healed from the transplant. And then I can start marching towards my concert I want to do, my mountain I want to climb. Do you think there's something that those people see that we don't see because they're going through something? Is there some maybe change in perspective or something along those lines?
I think they just have the ability to compartmentalize stuff.
Okay.
You might be, let's say you're going through a challenge and your mind is focused on that. You can't help it. But then you think, well, but over here I've got this great thing coming up, this great trip that I'm looking forward to, or great restaurant I want to try out, or something, or concert I want to either go to or perform in. Mm-hmm. So you're able to kind of push yourself towards thinking about those things, and not so much about the thing that's bothering you. And I think we all struggle with this. We have a tendency to worry about a lot of things, and we spend so much time worrying about stuff that in a lot of cases ends up never happening. Bad things that never happen.
Or outside of our control.
Yeah, exactly. Some things are out of our control. So there's really no point in so much worry. That causes a lot of stress, and yet we all do it so much. So I think the people who are able to fixate on the goals they're looking forward to, things in the future that they can accomplish or achieve, and by doing that, they downplay the serious experience they're going through. No matter what that is. something at work. It doesn't always have to, it doesn't have to be medical stuff. You can have a big project at work that's on your mind, and your boss is coming down hard on your mind. You got to get this done. It could be something like that. It could be a difficulty or a relationship difficulty you're having within your family. That is hard to overcome. It can be any number of things that you're facing, any number of challenges. To be able to get past the thoughts in your mind that are worrisome, and focus on things that you look forward to, I think is a great skill to have.
Yeah, I've heard of this thing lately. I guess metaphorically, it's like a muscle in your brain where the more hard things you do, the more that area of your brain grows. And then vice versa. So if you seek comfort all the time, that area of your brain shrinks. So it does seem like there's something that's got to constantly work at. And from what it sounds like, some of your stories is the more you kind of conquer that, the better you kind of get at things.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that brain muscle.
I forget what it's called. I'll put in the show notes for you guys if you're interested. Andrew Huberman's been talking about it kind of lately. I don't know if it's a new discovery or it's just kind of made it to the zeitgeist or something like that, but it is interesting. David Goggins, I'm not sure if you're familiar with these guys. They kind of talk about kind of this stuff, doing hard things. Michael, his name is, he wrote The Comfort Crisis. He talks about this as well.
Okay. It sounds like a great idea. I mean, yeah, I think some of that is, I guess I could say I've been through some of those, some challenges I've had to get myself past, and maybe, I don't know if I'd say I've improved, I've gotten better at it, but I can certainly see that, maybe being the case. I think I've become stoic to a large degree.
Which I love stoicism. So,
and I think, sometimes you almost have to be that way. And I don't mean just become a robot and not let yourself feel emotions, because you have to. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, I think we have to experience that. And I've heard this through reading about, psychology and stuff. You have to acknowledge that something bad is happening to you or happened, I think, to get completely past it. To ignore it and take on this, what I've heard referred to as toxic positivity, where you're, I have to go for root canal tomorrow. I'm really feeling great. I'm happy. Everything's,
you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think that idea of the more you use a certain skill, like or trait, like resistance or resilience, or perseverance, the better you get at it, or maybe the easier it becomes, over time. So I guess it depends on the challenge, but yeah, I think that's probably a big part of people. I've gotten feedback, I think, on my blog or maybe on social media from people who have said, gee, how do you get over this stuff so quick? Or how do you bounce back? And, and then they reference, gee, maybe it's because you've gotten better at it over time. And, so.
Yeah, I do think there's something to it with your stories, other stories I've heard, and then now some type of scientific research. It does seem like there's something to this. And I know personally, my example, I think classic examples, I ice bath pretty much every day. And at first it's like, why do you want to get into 30-degree water? That's just seems crazy. But every time you do it, it gets easier. And it's never easy, but the mental chatter, when I first would do it, I would stand there and wander around and come up with 5,000 reasons not to get in. And personally, 10 to 15 seconds of discomfort, that's, you spend all this effort and all this time to for 15 seconds, you forgot about it. Within 30 seconds, you forgot why you even stood there and didn't do it. But each time you do it, it's in a way, I kind of think harpens back to earlier in the conversation where, just doing these things and I kind of lost my thought there. But
how do you feel when you're done, when you get out of the water? How do you feel?
I feel great. I feel absolutely great. Medically, physiologically, there's a bunch of dopamines released and endorphins and all this stuff. And one thing that's really kind of interesting to me is, like, right now I have a little bit of a stuffy nose. If I just go standing there for 10 seconds, my nose is instantly clear. I don't understand how that works, but it's just great. And then I have heard, like, when you are sick, it's kind of good to get in because it helps get your white blood cells moving around or something along those lines. But I feel great. Some people don't feel anything. I talked with a doctor friend of mine. He's like, I don't get it. I do it. I've done it. I understand the benefits. He's like, I don't feel nothing. It's great when you get a hard workout going. You're real sore after. There is medically, please be careful. I've heard of people that if you have heart problems or blood pressure problems, there can be you can have some type of episode. So do be careful. It's not a cure-all. But there is a lot of things I've heard and research and stuff. People healing themselves. Like I said, I like it for injuries. I'm still quite athletic and I hurt myself all the time. I do, like I said, it feels great. And if you're not feeling great, just getting in there for like 30 seconds or something, it just seems to like open up things and clear you up. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's one of those things, it's just like we're talking, like doing those hard things and then knowing I can do this. It's not a problem. And I heard, I was talking with a friend and some people were out on the lake and they fell in and they didn't know that, they just panic set in. And I was like, well, I know how to handle that. Cause when you first get in this, no matter how many times you've done it, you get that gasp of air and the trick is to learn to gather that breath and then just kind of exhale. And then once you relax, your whole body kind of relaxes and the shakes and shivers and everything goes away. So there's a survival component to it as well. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. If people are interested, I'd say maybe check out your doctor if you've got health problems. But if not, there's plenty of like spa kind of places nowadays that have these. But I encourage people to give it a try if it's something that's physically within your reach. And you don't have to be a hero about it. It doesn't have to be this ridiculous cold. I believe 64, 65 degrees is like the minimum effective dose, which is not bad. Cold showers is a good kind of entry point into getting the feeling. You definitely get a good, like, kind of a high a little bit for a little while after, even just like a briskly cold shower. So that does work. There's something to it. So with your latest book, Life Lessons, How I've Learned to Embrace Gratitude, Positivity, Resilience, and Joy, is there one story you'd like to highlight before we kind of wrap up here?
One story from the book. There's one that kind of stands out. I was talking about humor earlier, and I have a section in the book about the need for humor. How it's so important. Sense of humor is always important, and I try to maintain that, even when I've been in the hospital, facing surgeries. I try to joke around. I try to keep it loose, and or I appreciate it when the doctors and nurses have a sense of humor. And there was one time when I was having I had to have a plate. I had a stress fracture in my hip years and years ago, right before the transplant. And I had to have, the only way they could fix it is by putting a plate and pins into my hip. And so the orthopedic surgeon who specialized in hip surgeries was on vacation. This was kind of an emergency. I had to have this done. I could barely walk. So it had to be done. And the doctor who was on call in the practice, who was going to do the surgery, was a hand specialist. He had no clue. Hips were not his thing. So I remember I was awake during the surgery because they gave me an epidural, which is what women get when they're pregnant.
Sure.
Which basically you're numb from like the waist down, I think. And so they gave me that. So I was conscious. I was wide awake, or maybe they might have given me something to make me loopy, like some sort of I forget what something to relax me. But they started their work, and I could hear everything, and and they were referencing some manual, a book, and saying, so okay, this is what we have to do next. And it was like I'm lying there and they're doing this, and I didn't care. I forget what they gave me for to relax, but I was completely cool about it. And I couldn't really feel anything because it was numb. And all of a sudden they were hammering, and it sounded like a saw, and like tools, like they were working on a project. And I said, at one point I said, we need our kitchen done. Are you guys available next week? and they laughed. And here they're doing this. They're trying their best, and this is not their comfort zone. And I thought breaking, just saying something like that would help break the tension or whatever. And they appreciated it. Later on, they told me, I'm glad, they were glad that I was in good spirits, and and then so I think humor is very important, and but because life is serious. Life can be very serious at times, and especially when there's war and stuff going on, or pandemics. I mean, we have lots to worry about. So being able to have a sense of humor. But the main themes of the book: gratitude, positivity, resilience, joy, goal setting. It's all important, and I tried. Each chapter has a lesson, and I think can be a value. I know I have to go back again and again and revisit these things because they're all important, and it can be very easy to forget stuff like that. So I hope that readers get even one positive message from the book. I'd be happy.
That's great. I haven't had a chance to finish reading it, but I'm excited to continue on. You have a great blog as well. It's got some great articles in there.
Thank you.
And then if you guys are interested in the first book and whatnot, I'll link all these things as well as your social media and whatnot for everybody to kind of get in touch with you, figure out, whichever ones things they want to go with. And then on the Social Community Show, we like to do a weekly challenge, something to inspire the listeners to either implement an idea or concept from this episode, or maybe something we didn't talk about at all. I would like you to issue this week's challenge to the listeners.
Okay, this week's challenge. Try to every day, when you wake up in the morning, think of 3 things you're grateful for. I think I'm actually plagiarizing this from somewhere because I remember seeing something like this. But just think of 3 things, and they should be different things. So by the end of the week, that's, I don't know, do the math. And if you want, make it one thing, but think of something each day that you're grateful for. And don't just name it, but think of why you're grateful for it. If it's your spouse or your job or whatever, why are you grateful for that? Because I think gratitude is right up there among the most important things we can practice.
That is a great challenge. And yeah, I think you're saying, when I first started doing this before, it's hard the first couple times, but stick with it, start getting a little creative, and, look around, just think a lot of things, especially in America and Western countries, there's a lot of things that we're grateful for that we just ignore, and the rest of the world will just love.
We take it for granted.
Yes. The clean water in our toilet is better than most countries people have to drink. So, there's lots of things if you really start to look around and,
absolutely
realize. And then the last question here I have is, it doesn't have to be a grandiose kind of thing or whatever, just however you want to define it. But what does living a legendary life mean to you?
Living a legendary life. I think making an impact, doing something, even in a small way, where, if you're on your deathbed, not to be morbid, but on your deathbed, or you're facing, you're towards the end of life, you can look back on it and say, gee, I'm really so grateful. I was able to do that. I helped out people or person, have an impact in some way, in a lot of ways. If you're somebody's very ambitious, that you're leaving a legacy, you're leaving something behind, where you can feel good about it, that you did something like that.
That's beautiful. I like that. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be a big thing. Your neighbor, your community, your church, or whatever. You're cleaning up your street. There's so many things we can do to improve the neighborhood and inspire others.
Absolutely.
Bob, thank you so much. I learned a lot. I got a bunch of notes here. Thank you for sharing everything.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I hope you guys enjoyed him. I got some great insights. I got a lot of clarity on offering support. I always felt like it was maybe a moot point to just say these platitudes of that, but it seems like it's helpful. But also, realizing that we need to maybe also think of something, spend a little bit of time with somebody we really care about, and offering something concrete, something like, not to just go for a coffee or you have time for, let's find something concrete there. I got a bunch of great notes. I hope you guys did too. And you guys know there's no paywall or premium content to subscribe to, no Social Chameleon Plus. You get all the good stuff right up front. And if you found value from this episode, share with you these 2 other people. And as always, in between episodes, you're just going to connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, or your favorite podcast player. For past episodes and link to everything we discussed here today, head over to the socialchameleon.show. Don't forget to subscribe on our Substack for show notes, legendary life posts, and monthly rewind delivered directly to your inbox. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and transforming on your path to becoming legendary.